I'm not at all disturbed by the fact. I was pleased by the fact that they were taking it so seriously,
And the reason
because
for
I
that
had
is
already
because they
been
had SARS.
seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They already had a plan in place. Like, again, it sure we'll get into the weeds of it at some point. God knows plenty of people have already, and I have in other venues. But the early days of the response and the cover up and silencing the whistleblower, I mean, that's all bad. That's in the category of things that are bad and made it worse, and delayed response. But once they said, okay, we're gonna
It's
lean
on.
into this,
Yeah.
they lean the hell in.
It seems like,
And
yeah.
yeah.
Doesn't it seem like there's a possibility of uh, some binary thinking going on when there's sort of universal condemnation of something? For example, when people say, okay, well, they ignored it at first, or for example,
Mhm.
the numbers are skewed. They're not showing the real numbers. First of all, even if they didn't recognize it at first, that doesn't have anything necessarily to do with later actions. You have to look at those two things separately because they are two separate categories of things. One is an
Right.
acknowledgement of something that's going on, and one is a response to something that has been acknowledged. They're two separate categories.
Hmm.
And then on
Yeah.
top of that, if you talk about hiding numbers, you first have to factor in the fact that you can't count every case. There's no way to know the full picture no matter where you are because testing is inherently chasing the thing that's running away ahead of you. You can't catch it.
Right.
And
Right.
even if they are hiding the numbers, it seems to me to make the most sense to look at the response as opposed to looking at the numbers, right? What is the
Hmm.
response that's happening? Locking down cities, closing Wuhan, shutting down the trains. I don't really care about the numbers at this point. Is it working or not? And that's just
Yeah.
about it for me. I don't know.
Yeah. I I I would have said the same thing in my own words. Exactly. I'm on the same page with you there. And it. I mean, I have all these friends. I mean, kind of the most. She wouldn't mind me using her as an example because I mean, I just had her on a short interview. I just had her on a podcast talking about it. Hey, the Stanley steamer truck stopped. If you lost some low end
Actually,
noise in my voice, you
I
probably
haven't
didn't even
noticed much
read,
of a
did it?
difference. It didn't. It really didn't. I mean, I'm
Great.
glad that they're
Great.
they're done. I hope it's
Yeah,
Stanley
me too.
Steamer's last
All right.
job. During
Yes.
it's not a good
Me
time
too.
to Stanley Steam, in my opinion.
Not a great idea to let's just try to get as many things in the air as we could possibly,
Yeah,
but
I don't get it.
but so I mean pretty much daily video chats with Susie back and when she was at her parents in Inner Mongolia for the holiday, and that extended a few weeks and was working. They went back to work by remote work from her company, and
Mm.
so she was already doing that. And there was a point where they said, okay, people, are going to be coming back to Beijing, and they extended the New Year's holiday about 3 weeks proper. And then there was even an added week. It was 3 or 4 weeks total beyond what it was supposed to be with, you know, coronavirus holiday, and they kept pushing and pushing.
Yeah.
And there was finally a day mandated where they needed to be back in Beijing to go to work, and there was a come back to Beijing day with the understanding that you would do a 14-day self quarantine, and that they would check you thoroughly at both ends of the trip, which they did.
How do
And so yeah.
Yeah, how do you see sort of because it happened at such a unique time in Beijing around China, the Chinese New Year is the most unique time of the year because everybody's going home. Do you think that
Yeah.
that negatively impacted this, or was that a positive impact? Is it a mixed bag? How do you see the whole thing in China as it played out in relation to the holiday itself? Because I mean, that's a very different dynamic over here because we sort of had a
Sure.
hard stop.
Sure. Well, I mean, most people have heard this because kind of peripherally, even if they pay no attention to China stuff. But the Chinese New Year holiday, the Spring Festival, it's the biggest annual migration of humans in the world. It's even bigger than like the pilgrimage to Mecca and things like this. So it's the most amount of people. It's like 1.5 billion trips because essentially half the country goes somewhere and they come back from somewhere over the holiday. They go to a hometown or else their relatives are coming in to see the kids in the city. depending on how the family situation is. So tons of people. Yeah. Uniquely bad. I mean, there were some aspects that worked well because a lot of things were shutting down anyway. You had certain businesses that were shut, certain travel was going to stop, but this happened before the massive travel. And again, this has been talked to death by many people, but the thing that is of all the bad decisions that happened, the most galling thing has got to be the officials in Wuhan, Hubei province, who knew what they had on their hands and decided to still go ahead with this 40,000 family potluck dinner in the city center, where it's like local people and dignitaries from the region, and some people flew in, and estimates were that it was literally 40,000 families invited. It was estimates were that it was like 120, 130,000 people, bringing food. There's like all eating and sharing food off the same lines in an enclosed arena or something.
They had full knowledge of what it was at that time. Was it
the local officials? This was just a week or so before Chinese New Year, week and a half. They absolutely were already getting a sense of this. This is, the suppression of the Dr. Li, I believe it was, and some of the others had already been happening. It was something that they already knew within official circles was an issue, and the local, again, I can't speak for somebody, can't be in their head, but I've talked about this with a lot of Chinese friends and super China savvy people. And we think this comes down to face, where they were too concerned with losing face. Like if they can, so this is the highlight of their year. They've been planning this for a year, this huge thing, all these big wigs and mockers, although it's a very specifically subset of American term, but like all these big wigs plus like local people coming into town. And so all these people in that petri dish. And then within a few days, the mayor of Wuhan, by the time this started to be exposed, and he said, well, our estimates, and he tried to walk the numbers back at some point, but I think his first answer was the one that was probably the most accurate. He said, 5 million people have left Wuhan in the last 4 or 5 days.
But it wasn't just
and
that.
They've gone all over, and they've gone all over. Yeah. They've gone all over the country. And asymptomatic for 2 weeks. There's reports that it may be longer than that. And it's possible this jumps way ahead, but getting back here, a friend's sister is a virologist who used to work at the CDC and is part of a biotech startup now in the Silicon Valley. And there are some articles that I'm getting that like referred or shared because of some of these people I know in the medical profession who have some real knowledge of this topic. They're saying it's possible there are people who are just carriers who are just going to walk
totally
around and never get sick.
Never
get sick.
And babies
but will always be a carrier.
Kids.
Yeah.
That's why they shut the schools down, because the kids are the ultimate carriers. They are not likely to get sick. And so they're going to come home after spreading it around and give it to grandma or mom and dad. And then they become carriers. The uniquely horrible thing here is this spider effect splinter from Wuhan out to the rest of China as people return home that's allowed to happen. But then once that happens, then it's shutdown mode, right? Basically. They realized how bad it was, but it was slightly too late. Because they could have contained it to Wuhan probably if they had shut it down.
The horse was out of the barn by the time they really took it down. But in terms of how it's worked, Susie's experience is pretty typical, where you had to come back to your place in your Beijing or wherever, and at the front gate, they're doing temperature checks. There's like masks and gloves, guards.
The community, right?
Community, like your xiaoqiu, your neighborhood, your apartment development or whatnot. There aren't that many single family homes in big city. I mean, there's in the suburbs, which
you
are
can't
way
say
out
you can't say here. So people listening to this certainly don't know.
Right. Well, I'm saying Luke knows.
Luke knows.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's mostly apartment living in the big cities and in general in China. Not a lot of single family dwellings in the bigger cities. So at the gate of your development, pretty much most of them are gated to some degree, whether it's fancy or just as a security thing. They check your temperature and they check your papers. And when Susie got back, she got in late because of the time of the trip. When she waited to the last moment, knowing she's gonna have to quarantine. They wouldn't let her in, and she had forgotten her key card. And the thing is, she actually had a copy of her rental contract, though. She had that with her in her bag, but she had forgotten her key card. My girlfriend.
She's the only one.
She had a lot of paperwork because she was dealing. It's a long story, but she was also had some business stuff to deal with while she was gone, and she thought, you know what, I'll take this with me. I'll have time to do some stuff online. So she needed all this proof of employment, proof of residence. So she happened to have that. So she ended up having to wake her poor roommate up after spending over an hour at the gate, and they know her, like the guards,
right?
You know, I'll wave at her. They know her.
It could be a mask. They might have seen Mission Impossible too.
Could be. Could be. But yeah, so she ended up having to. She's got a girl who's her roommate, you know, and had to wake her up.
It's interesting. I wonder to what extent the whole living structure has allowed for the containment of it, because a lot of, for example, American apartments are on a street along a row. For example, right next to me, there's a huge apartment building. I don't know how many apartments are in there, but it's a giant building. But it's straight across. So you do have an entrance, but there are many entrances, and you can go in any way. But in most, as you said, in most Chinese cities, you've got one or the other. Yeah, and all you need is one guy at the gate.